Hi, and welcome to the second edition of Anyone's Game with James and Sarah. This week we'll be talking about Mike Tindall, who's been removed from the England rugby union squad.
We'll also be looking at the Poppy saga that's dominated so many of the headlines this week.
And also with football, we'll be looking at the latest stadium name for Newcastle's football ground.
St James's Park no longer.
No longer.
Although not if the fans have anything to do with it.
Unless a company called St James's Park decides to sponsor
Stranger things have
St.
happened,
James's
I'm
Park
sure.
at St James's Park.
This is football we're talking about, after all.
So shall we start with the Poppy story then?
Yes, FIFA's latest, well, some are seeing it as an embarrassment. I think that's probably fair enough. It's been a fairly tortuous affair. Essentially, earlier in the week we found out that FIFA were not going to allow the England players to wear poppies on their shirts, despite an appeal by the FA. This is because of a FIFA directive that bans national teams from displaying national, political, religious or commercial symbols on their shirts. There's now been a compromise reached in the last couple of days. FIFA have decided that they're going to allow the England players to wear poppies, not on their shirts, but on the black armbands that will be on top of their shirts for this particular game. Obviously, this is around Remembrance Day, which falls today, and Remembrance Sunday will be this Sunday, the day after the England game at Wembley.
Am I right in thinking there's no international sport on this Sunday?
There's no Premier League football this weekend because it's an international weekend. And of course there's another game on Tuesday. England will play Sweden on Tuesday in another friendly match. So it's been a pretty long, drawn-out affair. Now seems to have reached some kind of resolution, thankfully.
Well, you get the impression that it was the pressure from the royal family and from David Cameron writing letters to FIFA.
That's certainly how it was reported, that it was Prince William's intervention particularly that brought FIFA to this kind of compromise. I don't know, personal opinions on the saga, what do we think? Do we think the FA were right to stick to their guns and push for the poppies?
Well, I think from FIFA's perspective, I mean, principles are very important to them, so I can see why they've made this stand. But in all seriousness, I don't know. It's a difficult one. I don't really see the point of opposing such a thing. I mean, we do have a movement of people who are against the red poppy because it commemorates soldiers and therefore commemorates the conflicts that have gone before. And there are people who argue that we should be wearing white poppies instead. But it's very hard to argue against wearing something which commemorates the fallen.
I think the argument is essentially around whether it was that important that poppies were worn on the shirts themselves. I mean, it's not as if the FA weren't already doing plenty to mark the occasion. I mean, we were having a look just now at the list of other things that are going on around Remembrance Day. Of course, the players observed 2 minutes silence this morning, which I believe was televised from Wembley. They paused their training for 2 minutes to mark Armistice Day itself. Tomorrow they'll be wearing poppies on their training kits, on their tracksuits. There'll be a wreath laid on the pitch during national anthems. Presentation party will include members of the armed forces. There have also been lots of tickets given for free to members of the forces through the Tickets for Troops programme. There'll be a 1 minute silence before kick-off. The players, as we mentioned, will be wearing black armbands, which now will also feature poppies. So, you kind of feel that they've done enough. The FA have really gone out of their way to mark the occasion, and that perhaps it wouldn't have been quite the outrage that it was being portrayed as in some quarters if they hadn't been able to add this kind of final embellishment. But, I mean, it's one of those incredibly emotive issues for people, poppies and the whole issue around remembrance and conflict. And, of course, the meaning of Remembrance Day is kind of expanded in recent years to include conflicts since the kind of two world wars that have affected so many people in this country, particularly things like Iraq and Afghanistan, have been kind of absorbed into the whole Remembrance Day event.
Maybe if this had taken place before 10 years ago, we might not be having, maybe there wouldn't have been such a principled stance by FIFA, but because of the connection with two recent wars, maybe that's why they've sort of held out for so long. This was the second time that the RFA had put this proposition forward to wear poppies on their shirts, and the first time, a couple of years ago, FIFA had refused as well. So it's been going on for a while.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the reason why both sides were so kind of intransigent over it, because obviously for the FA, it's a symbol of remembrance, and it's something that is very dear to a lot of people in this country. But of course, for FIFA also, they don't want to associate themselves in any way with a symbol that could be seen as so intimately linked with kind of conflict and war. So you can see why it's been such a kind of thorny problem. And I guess the compromise that's been reached, you would say, is probably fairly acceptable to both sides.
If we have a look at we've got 2 England friendlies coming up next week.
That's
right. We've got Spain on Saturday.
Yeah, Spain on
Saturday. We've got Sweden on
Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, so we can
two tough friendlies.
Yes, we can
never an easy game in football.
Away from the poppies and onto the football, which of course is what we should be talking about with these games. You could argue.
Are there any surprise inclusions or exclusions in the either squad for you?
Well, starting off with the England squad, as we mentioned, it's a young squad. There's a couple of players have been brought in to add a bit of youth to the side. Daniel Sturridge is a notable one. It's his first cap for England, so a big moment for him. On the side of sort of exclusions, people who aren't included, there are various reasons for this. Obviously, Wayne Rooney, given that he's not going to be there for the first 3 games of the European Championships, assuming that his ban is upheld, it kind of makes sense. I mean, Capello came out and said that he was going to try to experiment with combinations that didn't involve Rooney in order to prepare for that circumstance. So I don't think it's too big a surprise that he's not featuring in the squad. Of course, no Rio Ferdinand either. He's struggling with injury, as he has been for a lot of the past couple of seasons.
But despite the critics, Frank Lampard's back, and he's probably going to be captain.
That's right. It's been confirmed
for the Spain
today
game, at least.
That for the first of those 2 games, the Spain game, of course, which won't feature John Terry, although he will be in the squad to face Sweden, Frank Lampard will be captaining England. It's a remarkable turnaround for Frank Lampard. Just a few months ago, people were saying that he'd never play for England again, that his international career was finished, and now here he is leading out the national side. So it's a nice moment for him personally, I suppose, whatever you think of the decision.
I mean, recent years he's been associated with some of the poorer England performances. I can think of several. I mean, obviously he was very unfortunate in the World Cup with his goal, which wasn't a goal
against
Germany.
The goal that wasn't, yes.
But he's over the years he's had pretty good form for England. He's won the England Player of the Year a couple of times. I think 2004 and one other year. But yeah, he's 33, so it's hardly the youth the drive that
yes.
midfield needs.
Slightly at odds with the youth policy that a lot of people are seeing this squad as. I think one of the exclusions from the squad that's been covered quite extensively is Micah Richards, of course, the Manchester City defender, who's been in great form so far this season, has featured for England before, but I think certainly a lot of people were expecting his name to be on that list. And yeah, he, I think, reacted with a lot of surprise. I think on Twitter his response was something like disappointed, to say the least, with several exclamation marks, just to emphasise the point.
He's in great form again in the Manchester derby. When you look at the squad and look at the other right backs on offer there, you've got Glenn Johnson, Phil Jones, Phil Jagielka, and Kyle Walker, who's probably got through on his present form very, very good, especially his assist at the weekend.
Yes.
But you'd think he'd be better both defensively and offensively compared to most of those other players.
You do wonder. I mean, Capello talks all the time about how he picks his squads on form. Players don't get in on reputation. You kind of think, what more would he have to do to be in that squad? Especially given that it's now been announced, I think, that Phil Jones will be playing in midfield. So that's one less defensive option for England if he's going to be playing in a more advanced role. So, not quite sure about that decision, I have to say. Not quite sure where that one's come from.
Who do you think will lead the line?
Well, from what I've been hearing in midweek, there's a lot of people who are sort of championing the cause of Bobby Zamora, a Fulham player. I have to say, when I've seen him previously, I haven't been massively impressed. And oddly, a lot of people seem to be sort of putting him forward based on his performance against Spurs, when, of course, Fulham not only lost 3-1, but didn't score a goal. The one goal that did count for them was an own goal by one of the Spurs defenders. So he seems to be some of the pundits' favourites. I have to say I'm slightly less convinced of his merits.
Do you think he's Emil Heskey +1? Emil Heskey Mark II, maybe?
Perhaps. I think he's got some of the criticisms that were levelled at Heskey. He wasn't the most mobile of forwards. He was seen as sort of a bit ponderous, a bit lumbering maybe. And I think some of those same criticisms could be levelled at Zamora with some justification, maybe not quite to the same extent. Of course, Gabby Agbonlahor, who would have been one of the options, maybe less so for striker, but more in a kind of wide role where he plays a lot for Villa, has been ruled out through injury. He's now withdrawn from the squad, so maybe takes a bit of pace out of the England attack, which is a shame. Although, of course, with Theo Walcott in there, you're not going to be short of pace down the wings.
There's some quite exciting strikers there. I mean, we've got Welbeck, Sturridge, Walcott. They can all probably offer something.
And Darren Bent, of course.
Yeah,
yes. Who's one of the other options to lead the line. We'll see what develops with that, of course, closer to the game. How about the Spain squad? What are we thinking about that?
It's pretty weak, isn't it? I mean,
It's only Spain, what can they pull together? No. In all seriousness, it's pretty impressive. I mean, you read through that list of names and it's hard to see where Alan Shearer is coming from when he says that Spain are running scared. I mean, you've got Iker Casillas, probably one of the best goalies in the world right now. You've got people like Puyol, like Sergio Ramos, Xavi Alonso,
Busquets,
Fabregas. Fabregas struggling to get into the Spain starting lineup. That tells you something. Iniesta, of course. David Villa, David Silva, one of City's best players, if not one of the best players in the Premiership so far this season. It's quite a team, I think you have to say. You have to concede that England are going to have a real tough task on their hands come tomorrow evening.
Maybe I haven't read the article fully, but maybe Alan Shearer is drawing our attention to the fact that Lionel Messi might not be playing for Spain, and that might be why we've got a chance.
Maybe, although, it would involve a fairly major lifestyle choice. I don't know. I think Argentina's not a bad team to play for.
No.
So I think he's probably happy where he is.
So prediction?
I've got to go with Spain to win this one. In all honesty, I can't see this England team against that Spain team pulling it off. I'm going to go with 2-0, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking at the England attacking lineup, especially given the form of some of Spain's defenders and the talent they've got in goal, I'm not convinced that we're going to manage to get on the score sheet in this one. So I'm going to go with 2-0 to Spain.
I'd probably go 3-0.
Fair enough.
Staying with
more
football.
pessimistic than me.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah. No, I'm a massive Spain fan, mate. Staying with the football, we've got the latest name for what was formerly known as St James's Park. It was then Sports Direct at St James's Park, and now it's the Sports Direct Arena.
Yes, the Sports Direct Arena. Yeah. This is an initiative, of course, of Mike Ashley, the most loved man in Newcastle, favourite of all the Newcastle United fans.
Lots of him to go around.
Yes, that is true. There's lots of him to love or hate, depending on who and where you are. He, of course, also owns Sports Direct, chain of sports shops, and has decided to rename St James's Park. The plan originally, of course, was to keep the St James's Park name and attach a sponsor to that, but they've decided that's not commercially viable after all, and therefore that the St James's Park name will be scrapped altogether. And as we said, it's temporarily the Sports Direct Arena while they search for a more long-term sponsor. And of course, there is a precedent for this kind of thing in football. We've had Arsenal famously, although that did involve a change of stadium as well. Stadium, that was slightly different. We've had
more recently. We've had the Manchester City,
of course,
City of Manchester Stadium, which I thought was quite a good name.
Yes, given its
changed
location.
To the Etihad Stadium.
The Etihad Stadium, of course.
And another side issue about that is City being paid something like 100 million through this deal altogether, and sort of people are beginning to be a bit suspicious whether this might be a way to get around the financial fair play restrictions that are going to be brought in gradually over the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, the UEFA regulations, they're going to be brought in to ensure that clubs are running sort of on a sustainable financial basis and are going to ban from competition those that run at a loss. Of course, Manchester City, one of the clubs likely to be hit by those regulations. And Chelsea, of course, there's been rumours in recent days and weeks of Chelsea looking for a stadium sponsor. Well, there were rumours a while ago that they were thinking of moving out of Stamford Bridge altogether and relocating. Not sure what's happening with that, but the story seems to have changed slightly and now become that they're looking for a sponsor for the Stamford Bridge ground. So watch this space on that one.
I'm sure they'll definitely get some interest for that and probably a lot of money as well.
Probably. Well, they're not exactly short of cash
no,
at Chelsea, but you can always do with more.
If we move on to rugby now. Rugby union first, Mike Tindall removed from
Yes, yeah, it's an interesting story, this one. It's one that's been, of course, kind of rumbling on and attracting a lot of attention for a while now. It all started during the World Cup. Of course, there was that infamous night out in Queenstown. There were the the pictures of Mike Tindall with a mystery blonde, as she was labelled, and then Zara Phillips flew out to New Zealand and they, tried to sort of smooth everything over. And afterwards we found out that Mike Tindall had admitted that he'd misled team management about what actually happened during the evening. So I think it must be a combination of the fact that, yes, he behaved in a way that was unacceptable by the standards of conduct that are set for members of the EPS, the Elite Player Squad, but also the fact that he had then tried to cover up whatever it was that he was doing. I think that must have reflected pretty badly on him, and the decision's been taken to remove him from the squad altogether, and also being fined £25,000. So obviously the RFU...
Quite a lot for a rugby player, considering... Were they trying to settle for $50,000 to appear in the World Cup? Was that the payment per player they were going for?
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I mean, rugby players, compared to the average person, are pretty well remunerated. But certainly compared to footballers, it's nothing like the sums that you'd be talking about in football. So it is a very strong penalty, the fine, and also, of course, the removal from the squad, which it's being speculated could be the real death knell for Mike Tindall's career with England. I mean, must be 33 now, I think. He's criticised quite heavily for his performances in the World Cup, and of course the off-field incidents that created so much negative attention around England. So I think I'd be surprised if we see much more of Mike Tindall in an England shirt.
In terms of the coaching team, there's a potential new candidate to replace Martin Johnson in Nick Mallett.
That's right, Nick Mallett, the Italy coach, as he was until the end of the World Cup. Italy decided inexplicably not to renew his contract, and he's now stepped forward. There's an interview with him in the Evening Standard this week in which he officially announced that he wants the England job and that he thinks he's ready for it. So one potential successor to Martin Johnson speaking out. And of course there are others too. There's Jake White, the former boss of South Africa, and of course Graham Henry, who led the All Blacks to victory in the World Cup this year. He's now out of contract with them. That was his final spell in charge, and he's also in the job market. So we shall see, but we've yet to have any kind of clarity on what's happening with the England manager role. Of course, there's been no confirmation either way on what's happening with Martin Johnson. He himself has been, understandably, I suppose, very quiet about it. So we shall have to wait and see whether there is a position available and who the candidates will be.
We'll keep you updated.
Of course.
Moving into club competition, we got the Heineken Cup this weekend. Any juicy ties?
That's right, players? Yeah. It's an international weekend for football, so no Premier League matches. It's also a European weekend for rugby, so no Aviva Premiership fixtures. But as you say, lots of exciting Heineken Cup action to look forward to. I think my pick of the games is on Saturday. Munster will play Northampton. Should be a really interesting tie. Bit of a contrast of styles between the two teams. Munster, of course, pretty well known for players like Ronan O'Gara, Paul O'Connell, Peter Stringer, who play a pretty kind of conservative game, I think you would say, most of the time, but very, very good at grinding out results and winning when it counts. Very experienced European competitors. And then, of course, we have Northampton, known more for their exciting back play, players like Chris Ashton, Ben Foden.
Flamboyant would be a...
Flamboyant, yes, I think that's a good term, and creative.
Swashbuckling.
Swashbuckling, I like it. But of course, suffered heartbreak really in the Heineken Cup final last season when they were leading at half-time. Comfortably, it seemed, against Leinster, but of course the Irish team then came back to win it. So it'd be interesting to see how they go this season. I think that's probably my pick of the ties this weekend in the Heineken Cup.
And your prediction to win?
Oh, it's a tough one. I reckon Munster are at home in this tie, and Thomond Park, I think it's probably one of those grounds that the word fortress was invented for. They have incredibly passionate and partisan fans. It's a really difficult place to go and win. So I reckon it might be one of those ground out, gritty Munster performances that are so well known. So
Peter Stringer's been knocking around for ages, hasn't he?
He has indeed. Yeah, he hasn't played international rugby for a while, but yeah, he's been knocking around a long time. Of course, he and Ronan O'Gara have been playing together forever. It seems like they've been Munster teammates for many, many years and got a really great understanding. So,
and moving into the rugby league, obviously England lost last weekend at Wembley. Wasn't the greatest of matches for them.
No, that's right. They lost 36-20 against Australia. There was a fair bit of controversy in the game. There was England had a try disallowed at one stage. There was also an incident involving a dangerous tackle by one of the Australian players that I think a lot of spectators and a lot of people in the media felt should have been a sending off offence, should have been a red card. It wasn't. And of course Australia went on to win the game relatively comfortably. So lots of talking points in that one, but yeah, unfortunately the only one that really counts is the result, and it was a loss for England.
And the Welsh rugby captain for Rugby League, he's also set to retire.
That's right, yes. He's announced his retirement after they face Australia this weekend. I think he's been around and playing the game for many years, so it's a loss for Welsh Rugby League, definitely.
Yeah, if we move on to another sport, despite our sombre treatment of Andy Murray's injury in the last edition, he seems to have recovered.
That's right,
and
yes.
he's beaten Andy Roddick.
That's right,
again,
yeah. Back to,
but not in an important competition.
No, back to full fitness and back on form, it would seem, with a comfortable 6-2, 6-2 win over his namesake Andy Roddick in the Paris Masters this week. So he's now through to the quarterfinals and will play Thomas Burdick this afternoon. So a good result for Murray. He's on a good run of form, 27 wins in 28 matches, I think it is now. So things are looking good, but as you say, he's yet to really produce the goods in a major. So we'll have to reserve judgment for now and wait and see how he goes in the Australian Open.
A good tip for tennis players. We're talking about confidence being quite important. If they suffer a bad defeat in a big competition, maybe just go to a school and play to some kids at tennis, beat 17 of them, then come back and actually beat somebody.
Absolutely, build up the confidence again. But no, it's a really good run of form for Murray, and it's great to see him back to full fitness. Of course, the ATP Tour finals will be happening at the end of the month at the O2, and be interesting to see how he goes there.
Thomas Burdick never quite got back to the level he got to 2 years ago when he reached the Wimbledon final.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, of course, got to the final where he lost to Rafa Nadal. But yeah, produced a brilliant performance to beat Roger Federer. I think that was pretty unexpected. But you're right, it seemed to be a bit of a flash in the pan. Never quite reached those heights again. I think he has had a couple of injury problems, but then, as we were saying last week, what tennis player hasn't? It seems like, anyways, puts an incredible strain on the body. So, one to watch, potentially dangerous opponent, I think, for anyone. We've seen what he can produce at his best, but yet to find the consistency to really challenge at the top level.
In terms of consistency, we've got in cricket Sachin Tendulkar, who's been pretty consistent over the years, hasn't really had injuries affect him, but he's still not managed his 100th international test century.
That's right, yeah, he's still stuck on 99s, yet to make 100 hundreds. But he has passed a pretty impressive milestone this week. Became the first player ever in test match cricket to score 15,000 runs. That's pretty incredible when you think about it. And still going, of course, still playing at a really high level, but yes, yet to pass that milestone that everyone's kind of waiting for, really. I don't think anyone doubts that it will happen. It's a question of when. In
other cricket news, we've got, we brought you the spot fixing. The sentences were passed out last week. The former Pakistan captain, Salman Butt, is appealing.
That's correct, yes. His lawyers confirmed that he's going to appeal against his sentence. Doesn't come as a huge surprise, really. I mean, partly because he was given a much harsher sentence than either of the other two players involved, because he was the captain and seen as the instigator. But also because, as we mentioned before, it's the first time that sentences have been passed down using the Gambling Act 2005. It's the first case where that's really been brought into play. So it's not really surprising that he's kind of testing the limits of that law. And
there's also a pretty, well, I suppose a historic cricket match this week as well. Australia and South Africa.
Absolutely remarkable game in Cape Town. First test between South Africa and Australia, where some remarkable things. I think we saw 23 wickets fall in a day.
Good value for money.
Yes, absolutely wonderful entertainment. I think you probably, if you were one of the players involved, you'd be struggling to work out what was going on. Australia recording their lowest test score for a century. They were bowled out for just 47, which is almost unheard of nowadays. with the standard of cricket being pushed up all the time and the gaps between the teams getting smaller and smaller, especially with a top team like Australia, who you'd really expect to be making.
Well, are they a top team any longer?
Of course.
Losing to us in the Ashes in Australia.
Yes, well, that is, it's part of a wider debate because, of course, teams' fortunes in the different areas of the game do ebb and flow. Australia very much a force to be reckoned with in the shorter forms of the game, but in Test cricket they do seem to be on a bit of a downward slope at the moment. Contrast, of course, to England, whose Test team are on top of the world right now, but in the one-day game they really struggled. Lost, of course, the series 5-0 against India, the one-day series, having produced such a great performance in the Test match series. So, yeah, Australian Test cricket, at least, going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment, and their confidence certainly won't have been helped by that performance. They lost by 8 wickets in the end.
Also, coming back to home, we've got a potential announcement today. Later on the day, we've got we'll find out whether is it London gets the World Athletics Championships?
It's London, yes. It's cities officially that bid for the right to host the 2017 World Athletics Championships. And that announcement will be happening later this afternoon in Monaco, I believe. And London is competing against Doha, of course, in the capital of Qatar.
Which climate would you rather run in? Nice, cool temperatures with a bit of wind and a breeze, or a 50-degree baking heat?
Well, I know which one I prefer. Absolutely. I hope, obviously, being a Londoner, that we get the tournament. Being a huge athletics fan. But also, I think for the sake of a lot of the athletes, I mean, British athletes obviously especially, but I don't think there are many people who would enjoy running in 40, 50-degree heat. So, I really hope that London does get it. I mean, Qatar have got the 2022 World Cup. They don't need this as well. Give us this one. We're building a stadium specially and everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll be is it the Olympic Stadium that will be used? Which is part of the controversy between West Ham, Spurs, that what the Olympic Stadium will be used for in the 5 years between next year's Olympics and if we do get these World Athletics Championships.
That's right.
So track still needs to be there of some form.
That was a key part of the bidding process. One of the things that really strengthened London's bid was when they were able to confirm that there would definitely be an athletics track remaining at the stadium after the games. Of course, that was a real bone of contention, as you say, in the bidding process, with West Ham promising to retain the track, Spurs planning to scrap it and turn the ground into a football stadium specifically. Of course, the process has now changed. The original process whereby West Ham was selected has been scrapped, and the Olympic Park Legacy Company, the APLC, they're now looking for someone to rent as opposed to buy the stadium, so it'll be leased on a yearly basis. And because of that, they can dictate some of the terms on which that lease will operate. And one of those terms is that the athletics track be retained.
And the person leading the bid is Lord Coe, who's also led the Olympic bid. I mean, he was a long distance runner, won gold medals for it, and he seems to have the stamina for these big, pardon the pun, these big kind of bids.
That's right, yes. Of course, 800 and 1500 metre runner in the 80s had that famous rivalry with Steve Ovett, and seems to have very much taken to the kind of bidding side of things, the more administrative, organisational role, and seems to have, he's 1 from 1 so far. Let's hope it can be 2 from 2 by the end of today. It should be very interesting. Of course, relating to this story, we found out this week the chair of the OPLC accusing Spurs of spying on her and her staff during the bidding process. It's a really remarkable story, this.
Presumably they were using Benoit Asuakoto's big pink-orange Land Rover with the black stripes down the middle, kind of covert vehicle to survive. Just
to remain really inconspicuous. Yeah, absolutely.
So what were they accused of spying over?
Over the bidding process for the stadium, they were accused of spying on members of the OPLC while the decision was being taken. It's a really odd story. I think someone's been arrested and bailed over it, so we'll have to wait and hear about any further developments and any more revelations that come out. But a remarkable twist in what's already been a pretty long, drawn-out process. I think it's fair to say.
And I suppose we could finish with boxing. Now, I didn't quite understand the story of this next one. Two lightweight British boxers who have to fight each other. Scandal.
Yes, I think the reason this is unusual is because, of course, with the Olympics coming up, places in the team are up for grabs, so it's an incredibly competitive time, and Britain has a few boxers that are kind of there or thereabouts in each weight category. And of course, boxers are selected on form during tournaments, but normally they're assessed in terms of how they perform in fights against other people. Normally they wouldn't fight each other, whereas it's the British Boxing Championships this weekend, and two of Britain's lightweight boxers are going to have to compete directly against each other. They're calling it a box-off. That's effectively what it is. They are facing off against each other to try and get that place in Team GB for the Olympics next year.
It's quite a pressurised time for a lot of the athletes across all the different...
Disciplines.
That's the disciplines,
well,
yes.
All the sports, yes, absolutely. I mean,
you've got Kelly Sutherland, who lost out on funding was it a month ago now?
Yeah, well, she only came back to heptathlon very recently, having suffered with a lot of injury problems, and eventually decided to walk away from the sport. She came back, and yes, she's had her funding removed, but I think she came out and said that she absolutely understood why that was happening, because of course those in charge of Team GB, people like the BOA, the British Olympic Association, and UK Sport, and whoever else is in charge of the funding, are having to target their resources really
have less funds
at
than
those
they did
athletes who
when we did
they
so
think
well in
have,
Beijing.
Exactly, those who've got realistic medal prospects, partly because of the fact that there's less funding available overall. So I think it's understandable why that decision was taken, but of course Kelly Sutherland's been a really successful athlete for GB in the past, and we'll have to wait and see whether she can regain that level of success.
Yeah, we will wait and see. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the second edition of Anyone's Game.
I think just one final quick story, of course, very sad this week. Going back to boxing again,
yes, yeah.
The boxing world said farewell to one of its greatest icons, really, from the 70s, that era where there were those amazing rivalries, figures like Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, but also central to that whole era was Joe Frazier, Smokin' Joe. I think one of my favourite sporting nicknames of all time.
The first boxer to defeat Muhammad Ali, was it?
That's right, yes. Yeah, he fought Ali 3 times, lost 2 of those fights, but did win against him in 1971. And I think Ali said something like Frazier was the only boxer who really scared him. And I think that's what better tribute can there be
yes, definitely.
to a boxer's ability. So a very sad day for sport. I think he suffered with liver cancer for some time and died at the age of 67 this week. So a sad farewell to him.
Okay, thank you for listening, and we'll come back with another edition next week.
Absolutely. See you then.